You can fake strength. You can fake confidence. You can fake kindness, ambition, discipline for a while. But there are a few subtle, precise behaviors that betray the truth, and Machiavelli knew exactly how to detect them. Because in his world, surrounded by liars, opportunists, and cowards, he couldn't afford to guess who was strong and who was simply loud. He had to know. And he learned quickly. Weakness doesn't shout. It slips through the cracks. While strong men stay calm in silence, weak men expose themselves through patterns they don't even notice. And once you spot these patterns, in your enemies, your colleagues, or even yourself, you gain an advantage Machiavelli used like a dagger. The power to identify weakness before it becomes a threat. These behaviors don't seem obvious. In fact, most people would miss them, but Machiavelli wouldn't. He studied men like a predator studies movement, and he discovered 3 behaviors that instantly give weak men away. Let's begin with the first and perhaps most subtle behavior: over-justification. Weak men explain. Strong men decide. That's it. A man who constantly defends his choices, over-explains his actions, or tries to make others understand him isn't being honest. He's being insecure. Machiavelli observed this in court all the time. A prince who was confident in his authority spoke little, but a minister, a merchant, a man pretending to be important, he talked constantly. He needed others to agree with his logic so he could feel sure of it himself. It's the behavior of someone whose identity depends on being liked, not feared, not respected, liked. And Machiavelli would see this for what it really is: a man begging for permission to exist. Over-justification is a smokescreen for fear. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of power. And the truth is, any man who needs approval before he moves will never be trusted with real power, because power requires silence. Power requires conviction. Power requires the ability to make a move and not explain it to anyone. So the next time someone keeps explaining their opinion, repeating their point, trying to sound reasonable or nice or morally correct, you're not hearing strength. You're hearing inner collapse in slow motion. But that's only the first behavior. The second is even colder. Weaponized niceness. This is the most dangerous form of weakness, because it wears a smile. Machiavelli knew that the most spineless men didn't always look afraid. They looked friendly, helpful, accommodating. But it wasn't kindness. It was submission disguised as virtue. See, a strong man can be kind, but his kindness is selective, deliberate, and never at the cost of his self-respect. A weak man, however, tries to be agreeable at all times. He agrees to avoid tension. He compliments to be liked. He stays quiet when he should speak. He apologizes not because he's wrong, but because he's scared. And when that doesn't work, when being nice doesn't earn him validation, he flips. He becomes bitter, sarcastic, passive-aggressive. Why? Because his niceness was never kindness. It was a strategy to avoid rejection. And when it fails, his real resentment leaks out. Machiavelli studied this in public figures constantly. He wrote, "A prince must know how to do wrong and not use it, unless compelled." In other words, restraint is not the same as fear, but weaponized niceness is always fear. It's the posture of someone who doesn't know how to stand tall on his own, so he tries to stay small, hoping no one steps on him. And when you see this behavior in someone, this compulsive friendliness that turns sour under pressure, you've found someone who cannot be trusted with power. Because real power demands the ability to set boundaries, to say no without apology, to face tension without collapsing into false smiles. Machiavelli would watch for this behavior like a hawk, because it told him, this man's loyalty will break the moment it's tested. But there's a third behavior, more desperate, more exposed, and utterly humiliating to witness. And when you see it, you'll know you're standing in front of a man who fears being insignificant more than anything else. The third behavior, the one that made Machiavelli instantly classify a man as weak, was display addiction. You've seen it before. The man who always needs to be seen, the one who can't sit still without recognition, the one who posts constantly, speaks loudly, exaggerates every win, and turns every moment into a performance. Machiavelli saw these men everywhere, and he understood something most people still don't. The man who needs to be seen fears being forgotten. That fear, it's weakness. But not the kind that comes from poverty or lack of opportunity. The kind that comes from identity rot. Because display addiction isn't confidence. It's the panic response of someone who has no internal foundation. They think if they aren't being talked about, liked, praised, or envied, then they don't matter. Their value disappears the moment attention does. And this is precisely why Machiavelli saw them as liabilities. These men will do anything for attention. Lie, embellish, betray. They'll expose secrets, turn on allies, make enemies out of thin air, as long as someone is watching. Because in their mind, silence means death. Stillness means irrelevance. And the worst fate is to be forgotten. Machiavelli knew. A man addicted to display is a puppet waiting to be controlled. And if you ever want to ruin him, you don't need to attack. You just ignore him. Take away the spotlight. Cut off the applause. Make him feel invisible. Watch how quickly he breaks. Because while strong men train in private, grow in silence, and strike without warning, the weak man can't survive 5 minutes without being noticed. He's easy to predict, easier to manipulate, and impossible to trust. This is why Machiavelli feared weakness more than wickedness. Because at least a wicked man knows what he wants. The weak man, he wants everything, but will trade anything to get it. And when you combine all three behaviors, the compulsive justifier, the fake nice appeaser, and the attention addict, you don't get a villain. You get a void. A man so hollow that he'll take the shape of anyone stronger than him. And that's what Machiavelli feared most. Not the loud ones, not the cruel ones, but the empty ones. Because emptiness can be filled with anything. And when the wrong person gets close, they fill it with destruction. But here's where Machiavelli took it further. He didn't just identify weakness, he used it. He turned these behaviors into tools, predictors, leverage points. He knew that spotting a weak man early could mean the difference between power and betrayal. Because these men don't break when tested, they melt. And in politics, in war, in business, in trust, you can't afford to depend on someone who melts. So how do you protect yourself? How do you act like Machiavelli? You watch. You stop judging people by their smiles or words or titles, and you start judging them by their psychological patterns. You study what they do when no one agrees with them, when no one is watching, when no one praises them, or when no one gives them a reason to act good. You look for the cracks, because the strong man doesn't panic in silence. He builds, he sharpens, he plans. The weak man, he performs, he explains, he crumbles. And once you can tell the difference, instantly you gain a weapon most people never even think to sharpen. Discernment. The power to see not just who someone pretends to be, but who they will become the moment life stops going their way. That's how Machiavelli chose his allies. That's how he avoided collapse. And that's how you outlast everyone who's still fooled by the surface. Because beneath the right words and curated image, behavior never lies. Machiavelli didn't just spot weakness, he turned it into a ladder. While other men reacted to weakness with frustration or disgust, Machiavelli reacted with strategy. Because once you know someone's emotional fault line, once you know how they think, how they panic, how they seek approval, you don't need to argue with them. You don't need to fight them. You just guide them. Like a rope pulling a puppet from behind the curtain. He understood something critical. The weak man wants to be led. He just doesn't want to feel controlled. So Machiavelli gave them exactly what they wanted. Praise when they felt ignored. agreement when they felt insecure, flattery when they needed validation, not because he respected them, but because he saw how easily they could be shaped. And that's where his true power came from. He didn't rely on strength alone. He didn't force anyone to obey him. He made the weak obey themselves by offering them just enough emotional candy to keep them addicted to his approval. It worked like this. He would spot the justifier, the man who needed to explain everything. And instead of challenging him, Machiavelli would listen. He'd nod, make eye contact, say, "That makes perfect sense." And instantly that man would attach himself to Machiavelli, craving more of that rare validation, willing to defend him, support him, even spy for him, all because Machiavelli made him feel understood. But it was never understanding, it was leverage. Then he'd turn to the people pleaser, the man who tried to stay nice, agreeable, helpful. He'd give him a job, make him feel chosen, let him feel safe, like he was finally part of something powerful. And that man, he would never betray Machiavelli, not because of loyalty, but because betrayal would mean losing the only thing keeping his fragile identity together. And then there was the display addict, the man who needed attention like oxygen. To that man, Machiavelli would offer the stage. He'd let him speak in meetings, let him take public credit for ideas that served Machiavelli's goals. Let him wear the costume of influence, while behind the scenes, Machiavelli was the one writing the script, because he knew, if you give a weak man the illusion of power, he'll never question who actually holds it. This is how empires are built, not with war, not with blood, but with psychological engineering. You identify the weak, then you let them build your palace out of their desperation to be seen, approved, and included. And if they ever turn on you, you don't fight, you just withdraw the attention. Let them collapse in silence. Let them destroy themselves in a desperate attempt to feel powerful again. Because nothing crushes a weak man faster than being ignored by the person whose approval shaped him. That's the Machiavellian art of handling weakness. You don't argue. You don't expose them. You weaponize them. And as they dance for the spotlight, you remain still, silent, watching. While they chase applause, you acquire power. But Machiavelli had one more rule, perhaps the coldest of all. Never let a weak man believe he's your equal, because the moment he does, he forgets who built him. He overreaches. He fantasizes about rebellion. So you keep the gap wide. You reward just enough to keep him moving, but never enough for him to believe he no longer needs you. And if he ever tries to challenge you, you don't retaliate. You replace him, because there is no shortage of weak men desperate for validation. But there is only one of you. That's the Machiavellian way. Not domination by force, but direction by instinct. Not managing people, but puppeteering their insecurities until they call it loyalty. You don't need a title. You don't need a crown. You don't even need to speak loudly. To control weak men, all you need is understanding and silence. Machiavelli knew that the best manipulation doesn't look like manipulation. It looks like friendship. It looks like mentorship. It looks like presence. Because weak men are always watching, not for truth, but for signals. They move toward approval like moths to a flame. And once you know that, you can shape their entire behavior without raising your voice. This is how Machiavelli moved through courts, governments, and alliances without ever needing brute strength. He let weak men come to him, and then he played a role. He became the quiet listener to the over-explainer, the calm leader to the people-pleaser, the shadow architect to the attention-hungry puppet. He didn't resist their flaws. He fed them, just enough to keep them performing. And in return, he got loyalty without effort. He got defenders without asking. He got obedience without commands. This is what you must understand if you want real Machiavellian power. The best form of control is the kind they never see coming. It's when they think the decisions are theirs, when they believe they chose to follow, when they feel proud of serving you, not because you demanded it, but because you never had to. Let's break it down further. First, speak less than they expect. The weaker the man, the more he needs verbal affirmation. So you offer silence, strategic silence. You let them overexpose themselves. You let them talk themselves into guilt, loyalty, admiration. And when you do speak, make your words feel earned. That single compliment, that small nod of approval, that rare piece of advice. It becomes gold in their mind. They chase it. They talk about it. Now they're not just working with you. They're working for something inside them, something you created. Second, be the calm in their storm. Weak men live in emotional reactivity. They panic when plans shift. They overcorrect when criticized. They spiral when ignored. So you do none of those things. You stay composed. You move with quiet intention. You become the opposite of their inner chaos. This contrast makes them see you as powerful without you ever claiming it. They begin to believe, he must know something I don't. He's in control, I should follow his lead. They project stability onto you because their own identity is crumbling. And once they do that, your influence becomes invisible and total. Third, reward with unpredictability. This is the Machiavellian twist most people miss. You don't reward consistently. You don't become a predictable source of praise or support. You become mysterious. Some days you acknowledge them. Some days you vanish. Some days you nod. Some days you don't even look their way. Why? Because uncertainty creates addiction. They never know when your approval will arrive, so they keep performing. They keep guessing. They keep talking about you. You become not just a leader in their mind, you become an obsession. And this is where true psychological power begins. Because when they start needing your presence, your guidance, your recognition, they start fearing your disapproval. You don't have to punish them. Your absence is punishment enough. You don't have to correct them. Your silence becomes a mirror they can't escape. And now they belong to you. Not through fear, not through threats, but through a deeper, subtler bond. Dependency. This is the art of identifying weak men and turning them into tools of your rise. And the beauty of it is this: they'll never know. They'll call it admiration. They'll call it respect. They'll believe they chose this path. But you'll know the truth. You saw the cracks. You read the behavior. And while they tried to survive in noise, you rose in silence. Just like Machiavelli. There's one thing Machiavelli feared more than being overthrown by enemies, being betrayed by weakness within himself. He understood something most people still run from. Weakness is not just something you spot in others. It's something you must hunt within yourself every single day, because it doesn't arrive in obvious forms. It sneaks in, through over-explaining, through the need to be liked, through the craving for applause, through the silence you should have filled but didn't, through the apology you gave not because you were wrong, but because you were afraid. Machiavelli believed that self-mastery was a war, a daily war. And if you lost even one battle, the world would spot the crack before you did. So he developed a system, a way to detect weakness the moment it whispered in his own mind. Here's how he did it. First, he watched how he explained himself. When you're strong, you make decisions. When you're weak, you explain them. Machiavelli trained himself to notice when he started talking too much, when he repeated a point, when he adjusted his message based on the room. Each time he asked himself, is this conviction or a plea for acceptance? And if it was the second, he stopped, because he knew a man who begs for validation forfeits authority. Second, he tested how often he said yes. People think yes is positive, but Machiavelli saw it as dangerous. A weak yes can ruin a kingdom, agreeing to avoid conflict, agreeing to gain favor, agreeing without boundaries. He learned to pause before every agreement and ask, would I say yes if I didn't fear losing their approval? If the answer was no, he declined. No apology, no excuse. Because the moment your word loses weight, you lose power, even in your own eyes. Third, he measured how silence felt. Weak men hate silence. They rush to fill it. They joke, they compliment, they explain. Because silence reveals the truth. But Machiavelli made silence his weapon. He practiced it in rooms full of noise. He measured his comfort inside it. And when it felt tense, he leaned into it. Why? Because silence, when mastered, becomes presence. And presence, when mastered, becomes intimidation without intention. Fourth, he resisted unnecessary exposure. The weak man always wants to be seen. The strong man, he chooses when. Machiavelli practiced invisibility. He watched others chase the spotlight. He stayed in the shadows until every piece was in position. And then, when he finally moved, it wasn't seen as progress. It was seen as arrival. He didn't build anticipation through announcements. He built it through absence. So when he spoke, when he acted, when he made his presence known, people stopped moving. That was no accident. It was trained, refined, engineered. He removed every trace of weak behavior in himself before the world ever had the chance to use it against him. Because Machiavelli didn't just play offense. He closed the doors that others could use to break him later. And that's what most people fail to do. They try to look powerful, but they never ask themselves, do I chase praise? Do I fear rejection? Do I speak to be heard or to be agreed with? Do I need people to like me before I lead them? Do I explain when silence would have been stronger? These questions don't just reveal weakness. They reveal your limits. And once you spot them, you have two options. Feed them and stay where you are. Kill them and become something the world cannot ignore. Because in the Machiavellian world, you don't get punished for being evil. You get punished for being predictable, emotional, weak. So you strip it out, bit by bit, word by word, decision by decision, until one day you speak and people freeze. You move and people adjust. You lead, and no one questions how you got there, because they won't see a man trying to look strong. They'll see a man who's been forged in silence. Respect isn't demanded. It's not asked for, and it's definitely not begged for. It's engineered. And Machiavelli knew the blueprint. He understood that the highest form of respect, the kind that doesn't fade in your absence, the kind that silences a room before you speak, comes from one thing: mastery over what weak men fear most. See, weak men fear discomfort. They fear being misunderstood. They fear being disliked. They fear standing alone in a room full of noise. But the Machiavellian man, he embraces it. He doesn't run from tension. He walks into it. He doesn't collapse under judgment. He sharpens under it. Because when you kill the instinct to justify, when you stop seeking applause, when you remove every trace of fear-driven behavior, you become something alien to the average man, something unsettling, something untouchable. And that's exactly why people begin to respect you. Not because you speak louder, not because you seem nice, but because you reveal nothing, and that terrifies them. It's human nature. We fear what we cannot figure out. So when you walk into a room and don't need to prove anything, when you hold your posture while others flinch, when your silence feels heavier than their best words, you change the dynamic. You don't chase respect. You become the source of it. People begin to shift their tone around you. They speak more carefully. They measure their words because they don't want to be seen as weak in your presence. Why? Because you've mastered what they haven't. You've killed the need for constant validation. You've silenced the voice that craves attention. You've made peace with your own solitude, which makes your approval incredibly rare. And rare things are always valuable. This is the final Machiavellian tactic. Make your respect expensive. Don't give it easily. Don't flatter casually. Don't smile for free. Make them earn it. Because once they realize you aren't moved by charm, by pressure, by popularity, they'll adjust to your standard, they'll rise to it, or they'll disappear. And either way, you win. You either gain stronger allies, or expose the ones too weak to walk beside you. This is how you rule, not with power you shout about, but with power that's felt. The kind that makes people ask, why does he make me uncomfortable? Why do I care what he thinks of me? What does he see that I don't? That's not intimidation. That's presence. And presence is built by removing every behavior that exposes weakness in them and in yourself. Because once you've done that, once you've purified your speech, refined your silence, and made your identity unshakable, you become what Machiavelli admired most. A man who doesn't just command respect. He doesn't give them a choice. Not through cruelty, not through fear, but through sheer, undeniable calibration. You've become the standard they measure against, the mirror that reflects their insecurities, the quiet reminder that strength never needs to introduce itself. So let the weak reveal themselves. Let them talk. Let them seek attention. Let them chase comfort. And while they do, you build, in silence, with precision, until one day they can't stop watching, and they'll never understand how they lost to someone who never even played their game. That's the final lesson. You don't expose weak men by confronting them. You expose them by never needing to. That is Machiavellian power.